It's officially Pride Month, and we're kicking off the celebration by highlighting a queer author who's making a difference for children everywhere. Seamus Kirst is showing kids that they can love and accept themselves and their families just as they are with his new book, Dad and Daddy's Big, Big Family. We're chatting with him all about it. This is Advocate Now. Seamus, thank you so much for being here. And I want to talk about your new book, Dad and Daddy's Big, Big Family. Tell me a bit about the book and what inspired it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. This book is about a young girl named Harper, who has two dads, and the family is going to their first family reunion. So the book kind of explores like what constitutes a family through the lens of this family reunion. When she goes, she meets her second cousin, who's her age, and they kind of have this silly situation where they're trying to figure out what they're going to do because they believe that family are the people who you live with. So they're like, how are we going to fit all these people into our house? So like as the book goes on, you're kind of seeing all the different smaller nuclear families within this large extended family and kind of sillily exploring just like kind of the diversity that can even exist within one family. And the inspiration for this, so in 2020, I actually wrote my first children's book, which is called Papa, Daddy, and Riley. And that book is different in the sense that it's very much kind of like in the vein of Heather Has Two Mommies from 1989 by Leslie Ann Newman, which is one of my favorites. But it's like very much about the fact that Riley has two dads and like talking about how that is normal. So speaking to that, and I wanted after that book to do books that had more matter of fact representation of LGBTQ people, especially like with all these laws about, don't say gay being passed in like more than, I mean, not being passed yet in more than half of the states, but like books being banned in more than half of the states in our country, specifically LGBTQ books. I wanted to kind of like push back on that by being like, okay, well, this book isn't even saying gay, but it's just like representing gay people because gay people exist.
And I want to ask you about that because these books, especially your new book, is, as you mentioned, a celebration of diversity. Why do you think that is so important to illustrate in today's climate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to illustrate because, like, obviously there's such an active movement against this representation. So I think we all need to do everything we can to, like, push back against that because every minute we're not doing that, we're being pushed in the other direction. Um, and I mean, the other thing about both of these books that I've always kind of had in my mind too is like, obviously, the primary group of people that I'm trying to uplift through these books are LGBTQ people who I believe deserve to be represented in books. But I also kind of like had this idea while writing them too that it's not like these are books just for LGBTQ people. Like, I think that in the same way as a kid, I was read parenting books that had a mom and a dad, like children who do have a mom and a dad can also be read books about parenting issues from a family that has two dads. And I think that sort of representation is also really important in every family.
And you touched on, books being banned in public schools right now. And it was actually your book, Papa, Daddy, and Riley, that was on the American Library Association's list of banned and challenged books just months after it was published. So what was your reaction to that? And what are your thoughts on the current book bans?
I mean, I think the sad thing is that when it was banned, I honestly wasn't surprised just because I feel like these bans are so widespread and so crazy that you kind of just anticipate any book that is for children that has prominent LGBTQ characters. And I also want to like explicitly mention also how actively these same people are banning any books that have mentions of like race or racial justice or the inarguable history of racism in our country are also being banned. But yeah, so sadly I was not surprised. But I think it's also really depressing and kind of, I mean, obviously it's like depressing and morally reprehensible, but like one of the things that's so crazy about it is I'm sure people don't even read any of these books that they're banning. I think that so often it's like a small passage is copy and pasted totally out of context, and then these people are saying it's like pornographic and ignoring the other 200 pages of the books that like put that passage into context in a way that is like objectively important for kids to read. And then even with like picture books, they're just seeing that there are two dads or hearing that there are two dads or two moms and
Literally
just
judging a book by its cover, literally.
yes, literally judging a book by its cover. That's so true. And I think that's what's really sad and disturbing about this is it's like totally just a like reactive mayhem.
On the positive side, do you think that highlighting queer representation in the way that you are can give children permission to love and accept themselves and their families as they are?
Yes, 100%. I think it's so important for everyone to read books and watch TV and watch movies and see themselves and their families and their communities be represented. And I think that does lead to self-love. And even like when I think back to being a kid, I don't remember reading any children's books with same-sex parents or with like queer protagonist children, even though some did exist, as I was saying earlier, like Heather Has Two Mommies came out the year before I was born, which is really amazing to think about. But yeah, I just think it's so important to see yourself. And that's even, I'm like, both of the illustrators that I worked with on the two books, I love how their illustrations also have very subtle representation, and each book has specific sections where it just talks about different families, like mentions foster parents, mentions single parents, mentions people who are raised by their grandparents, because you know so many people in this country don't have this like traditional kind of fable of like what a nuclear family always has to look like, which is like a mom and a dad and a house with a white picket fence and a golden retriever or whatever. So many people have different lives and they deserve to see themselves too.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to ask you about your path to becoming an author because you were working in politics and you decided to make a career change. What inspired you to eventually become an author? Because you were working on, writing articles and that sort of thing, and particularly to eventually focus on children's books.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I jumped around a lot in my 20s for sure. I was also a journalist. The kind of only constant thread was writing. But I think what really inspired me to do children's books is I loved reading as a kid, and I was like one of those kids who would just disappear into the room for, days on end reading. And so when I got older, like it was always something that I wanted to do and write a children's book. And I got this really good piece of advice from a friend who was like basically saying that when you're approaching children's books, the two kind of angles that you might want to take are writing a book that you wish had existed when you were a kid, or a book that you would one day want to read to your kids. And so with both of my books, I kind of feel like they checked both of those boxes, which was exciting to me.
And of course,
Oh, yeah.
Pride Month right around the corner, and it's important to celebrate the queer community. Any plans for Pride Month?
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing, because this book just came out, I'm doing a lot of very fun Pride Month children's books events here in New York. Like at bookstores doing read alouds, and I'm excited to meet a lot of kids and families, and definitely will go to the parades and support the queer community. I think it's important now more than ever that we all have solidarity.
Well, congrats again on your new book. And if folks don't get a chance to make it out to one of your events or book signings, at least check it out. It's called Dad and Daddy's Big, Big Family. Seamus, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm Sonia Baghdadi. Thanks for watching and advocating. For more stories and content like this, visit advocate.com and advocatechannel.com.